December 7th, 1944. The Ardennes forest, eastern Belgium. Oberst Heinrich von Luttwitz peers through frozen binoculars at the American defensive line near Bastogne. His 5th Panzer Army intelligence briefing was explicit. The Americans have perhaps 30 to 50 tank destroyers scattered across this sector. M10 Wolverines, mostly. 30 tons, open turrets, 76mm guns. Dangerous if handled well, but slow. Maximum road speed, about 48 kilometers per hour. Cross-country, perhaps half that, in winter mud and snow. Von Luttwitz allows himself a moment of confidence. His division fields 42 Panthers and 18 Tigers. The plan is textbook blitzkrieg, overwhelming force concentrated on narrow axes, breakthrough before the Americans can reposition their scattered defensive assets. Tank destroyers are powerful when dug in, but Operation Wacht am Rhein depends on speed. By the time American tank destroyer battalions realize where the main thrust is coming, German armor will already be 15 kilometers behind their lines, racing for the Meuse River crossings. What von Luttwitz does not know, what German intelligence has catastrophically failed to identify, is that the Americans have deployed something entirely new to this sector. Not the M10, not even the recently arrived M36 Jackson with its 90mm gun. Something faster, much faster. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. 8 kilometers south, near the village of Chinon, First Lieutenant Edwin Leiper of the 805th Tank Destroyer Battalion sits in the commander's position of an M18 Hellcat, vehicle number C7. The temperature is minus 12 degrees Celsius. His breath fogs the periscope optics every few seconds, forcing him to wipe them clear with a rag that is frozen stiff. Through the haze, he watches the tree line 600 meters to the east. The M18 is a revelation and a gamble in equal measure. At 18.4 tons, it is the lightest armored vehicle in its class that the United States Army fields. Its armor is laughably thin, 25 millimeters on the front glacis, at 45 degrees, 12 millimeters on the sides, barely enough to stop rifle-caliber rounds. A Panzerfaust at close range would tear through it like paper. The crew compartment is open to the sky, offering no protection from airburst artillery or even hand grenades. But what the Hellcat lacks in protection, it makes up for in speed. The Wright Continental R975 C4 radial engine, the same power plant used in the M4 Sherman, but in a vehicle weighing 20 tons less, delivers 460 horsepower to tracks that barely seem to touch the ground. On good road surface, the M18 can reach 88 kilometers per hour. Even on frozen Belgian back roads, it maintains 60 to 65. Cross-country, where a Sherman bogs down and a Panther grinds forward at 15 kilometers per hour, the Hellcat dances at 35 to 40. Leiper has been in this machine for 3 weeks. Before that, he commanded an M10. The difference is night and day. The M10 felt like driving a brick, solid, predictable, but ponderous. The M18 feels alive, almost nervous, like a racehorse that wants to run before the rider is fully settled. The crew calls it the Hellcat, not just because of the official designation, but because it hunts like one. Fast strike, vanish, reposition, strike again. The tactical doctrine is equally radical. Traditional tank destroyer doctrine, perfected with the M10, emphasized positional defense. Dig in. Let the enemy come to you. Kill from ambush. Withdraw only when forced. The M18 inverts this entirely. Its doctrine is pursuit. Find the enemy. Strike first. Never stay in one place long enough for counter-battery fire. The speed is not just an advantage, it is the survival mechanism. You cannot armor an 18-ton vehicle against an 88mm gun, but you can make sure that gun never gets a settled shot. Leiper's platoon has 5 Hellcats positioned in a loose arc covering the approaches to Bastogne. On paper, they are outgunned and outnumbered. German intelligence estimates 50 tank destroyers in the sector. In reality, there are perhaps 35 operational vehicles, and only 15 of those are M18s. The rest are older M10s and a handful of towed 3-inch guns against 200 German tanks pushing through the Ardennes. The math is brutal, but the math does not account for speed. Yes, the Germans have built their armor philosophy on a foundation of iron. The Tiger I, introduced in 1942, redefined what a tank could be. 57 tons of steel, 100 millimeters of frontal armor, an 88 millimeter gun that could kill any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters. In Tunisia, in Normandy, in Italy, the Tiger became a legend and a nightmare. Allied tankers learned a harsh equation. Meeting a Tiger meant losing 3, 4, sometimes 5 Shermans before bringing it down. The Panther, arriving in 1943, was arguably even more dangerous. At 45 tons, it was lighter and faster than the Tiger, yet its sloped 80mm frontal armor and 75mm KWK-42 gun made it nearly as deadly. The KWK-42 could penetrate 174mm of armor at 1,000 meters, more than enough to kill any American tank in service through late 1944. Meanwhile, the Panther's glacis, sloped at 55 degrees, gave an effective thickness of roughly 140 millimeters, impervious to the Sherman's 75mm M3 gun, except at point-blank range and from the side or rear. German tank crews trained on a simple principle. If your machine has superior armor and firepower, control the its engagement range. Keep the enemy at distance where your gun is effective and theirs is not. Close-range brawling negates armor advantage. Long-range duels maximize it. In the vast spaces of the Eastern Front, this doctrine proved devastatingly effective. A well-positioned Tiger or Panther could dominate a battlefield, forcing Soviet tanks into desperate flanking maneuvers that cost dozens of T-34s. The Americans, arriving in Europe in 1944, faced this philosophy with machines that could not match it ton for ton. The M4 Sherman, backbone of the U.S. Armored Force, weighed 30 tons and mounted a 75mm gun adequate for supporting infantry and fighting medium tanks but helpless against German heavies in a direct duel. The American answer was not to build heavier tanks, though the M26 Pershing would eventually arrive, but to build dedicated tank destroyers that could kill German armor through mobility and firepower rather than protection. The M10, first of the American tank destroyers to see mass production, embodied this compromise. A 76mm gun on a Sherman chassis, capable of penetrating 88mm of armor at 1,000 meters, but with only 37mm of frontal armor and an open turret. It worked, but barely. M10 crews in Normandy learned to hunt in packs, using terrain and ambush to offset their vulnerability. The tactic was effective. M10s achieved kill ratios of approximately 2.6 to 1 against Panthers and Tigers, but costly. 1 in 3 M10s was destroyed in combat. By late 1944, American doctrine had evolved. The M36 Jackson, mounting a 90mm gun, could finally penetrate Tiger frontal armor at reasonable combat ranges, but it still relied on the same chassis as the Sherman, with similar mobility limitations. What the tank destroyer force needed was not just more firepower, but a fundamental rethinking of how to fight German armor. The answer came from an unlikely source, the Buick Motor Division. In 1942, the U.S. Army Ordnance Department issued a specification for a new tank destroyer. Maximum speed, maximum firepower, minimum weight, armor was explicitly sacrificed. The thinking was radical. If German tanks could not hit you, armor became irrelevant. The design that emerged was extraordinary. The T-70, later designated M18, used the Wright R975 radial engine in a hull that weighed less than 19 tons, combat-loaded. The armor was thin enough that engineers worried about structural rigidity. The turret traverse, powered by a hydraulic system rather than electric, could rotate 360 degrees in just 20 seconds, faster than any tank in the world. The 76mm M1A1 gun was the same weapon mounted in late-model Shermans, capable of penetrating roughly 100 millimeters of armor at 1,000 meters with standard M62 armor-piercing ammunition. With HVOP, high-velocity armor-piercing, tungsten-core rounds, penetration jumped to 157 millimeters, not enough to reliably kill a Tiger from the front, but more than sufficient for flanks and more than adequate for Panthers at medium range. The first production M18s rolled off the Buick assembly line in July 1943. By March 1944, the 1st Battalion, the 803rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, arrived in Italy. Crews were skeptical. The vehicle looked like a death trap. Thin armor, open top, riding so low that the driver's hatch barely cleared the ground. One tanker described it as a go-kart with a cannon. But on the roads of Italy, skepticism turned to enthusiasm. The M18 could outrun anything on the battlefield. It could accelerate from 0 to 50 kilometers per hour in under 12 seconds. It could traverse terrain that bogged down heavier vehicles. But most importantly, it could engage, kill, and disappear before German gunners could traverse their turrets. The tactical revolution was immediate. Where M10 doctrine emphasized static ambush, M18 doctrine emphasized fluid pursuit. Find the enemy, strike from an unexpected angle, vanish before counterfire, reappear somewhere else entirely. German tankers, trained to fight methodical positional battles, found themselves chasing ghosts. Staff Sergeant Henry Hank Romano of the 803rd Battalion described his first engagement in a letter home. We hit a Panther column on the road to Anzio. 4 tanks, moving maybe 20 kilometers per hour. We were behind a hill, about 800 meters out, and its lieutenant gave the order, and we came over that rise doing 60. The Germans didn't even see us until we fired. We got 2 kills in the first 30 seconds. Then we were gone, back over the hill, and repositioning a kilometer south. By the time their turrets swung around, we weren't there anymore. They shot at empty ground. The numbers from Italy were promising, but limited. M18s in the Italian campaign destroyed approximately 80 German tanks and self-propelled guns at a loss of 16 vehicles, a 5-to-1 ratio, nearly double the M10's performance. But Italy was a secondary theater with relatively few heavy German tanks. The real test would come in northwest Europe, where Tigers and Panthers operated in mass. The 805th Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M18 Hellcats, arrived in France in September 1944. By November, they were positioned in the Ardennes, a quiet sector where the US command expected little activity. The front had stabilized. The Germans appeared exhausted. The Allies were preparing for a spring offensive into Germany itself. What Allied intelligence missed, what photo reconnaissance and radio intercepts and prisoner interrogations all failed to detect, was the largest German armored concentration since Normandy. 3 panzer armies, over 1,200 tanks, assembling in the forests east of the Ardennes. Operation Wacht am Rhein, Hitler's desperate gamble to split the Allied armies, seize Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace before Germany's industrial base collapsed entirely. And standing in the path of that avalanche were 35 American tank destroyers scattered across an 80-kilometer front. December 16th, 1944, 5:30 in the morning. The first artillery shells began falling on American positions at exactly 05:30. Not harassing fire, not ranging shots, a full preparatory barrage, 1,500 German guns firing in coordination, saturating defensive positions from Monschau in the north to Echternach in the south. For 90 minutes, the ground shook, trees exploded, communication lines snapped, forward observation posts simply ceased to exist. At 0700, the barrage lifted. Through the smoke and snow came the German armor. Lieutenant Leiper, in his Hellcat 8 kilometers southeast of Bastogne, first learned of the attack not from official channels, those were already disrupted, but from the sound, a rumble that grew from distant thunder to physical vibration in the ground. Then, through the tree line, movement. Not one tank, not a platoon, dozens. The radio crackled. Battalion net, already degraded by atmospheric conditions and German jamming, carried fragments. Contact, heavy armor, multiple, pulling back. Leiper made a decision in seconds. The doctrine was clear. Do not stand and fight when outnumbered. Find the flanks, kill the logistics, disrupt the tempo. He ordered his driver, Corporal James Decker, to start the engine. The right radial caught on the first try. The Hellcat's reliability in cold weather was one of its few unqualified advantages, and Leiper directed Decker south, parallel to the German advance, but out of direct contact. Speed 50 kilometers per hour on the icy back road. Behind him, 2 more Hellcats from his platoon followed at 50-meter intervals. The German plan was methodical. Lead elements were infantry and engineers to clear obstacles. Behind them, the armor, Panthers and Mark IVs in the first wave, Tigers held in reserve for breakthrough exploitation. The Germans expected resistance, but calculated they could overwhelm scattered American positions through sheer mass before reinforcements arrived. What they did not expect was an M18 appearing on their flank at 60 kilometers per hour. Leiper's plan was not heroic, it was mathematical. The German column stretched for kilometers, moving at perhaps 20 kilometers per hour on narrow roads. Vehicles were bunched, poor spacing in the rush to maintain momentum. Leiper positioned his 3 Hellcats on a low ridge, 700 meters from the road, partially concealed by a destroyed barn and winter scrub. At 09:15, a Panther column, 6 tanks moving in file, came into view. Range, 720 meters. Target, 3rd tank in column. Reasoning that the lead vehicle might be more alert, but the 3rd would be complacent, assuming the leaders had cleared the area. Gunner, Panther, 720 meters, 3rd in line, Leiper said calmly into the intercom. Sergeant William Bill Kowalski, the gunner, had already identified the target. The M18's excellent optics, a rarity in American armor, gave a clear view even through falling snow. He waited for the Panther to emerge fully from behind the lead vehicles, then fired. Time of flight at 720 meters, approximately 1.1 seconds. The M62 armor-piercing round struck the Panther's right side at roughly 30 degrees to perpendicular. The Panther's side armor, 50 millimeters thick, was adequate against most threats, but not against a 76 millimeter gun at this range. Penetration. The tank lurched, smoke pouring from the engine deck. Seconds later, ammunition detonated. The column halted. Predictable. The lead Panther commander would now try to identify the threat, orient the column, and return fire. This would take between 30 and 60 seconds, time the Germans assumed they had, because American tank destroyers were slow, positional, and would still be in the same location. The M18s were already moving. Decker had the Hellcat in motion before the shell casing from the first shot hit the ground. Reverse 15 meters. Traverse right. Accelerate forward on a different bearing. By the time the Panther turrets swung toward their original position, Leiper's vehicle was 200 meters away and hidden behind a different fold in the terrain. The 2nd and 3rd Hellcats in his platoon fired from their positions. 2 more hits, 1 Panther immobilized with damaged tracks, another burning. Then they too displaced. Total time from first shot to all 3 Hellcats in new positions, 40 seconds. The German return fire hit empty ground. This was the Hellcat doctrine in pure form. Shoot, move, survive. The speed was not a luxury. It was the entire survival mechanism. A Tiger could kill an M18 with a single hit from its 88 millimeter gun at over 1,500 meters, but it had to actually hit. And hitting a target moving at 60 kilometers per hour, appearing and disappearing behind terrain features, firing and vanishing in under a minute, proved nearly impossible. By 09:45, Leiper's platoon had killed or disabled 6 Panthers and 2 Mark IVs at 0 losses. The German column, stretched along 5 kilometers of road, was paralyzed. Vehicles bunched up behind burning wrecks. Officers tried to establish where the fire was coming from. Units peeled off to sweep flanks. All of this consumed time, precious time that the German offensive could not afford. At battalion headquarters, 12 kilometers west, Major Harold Jensen, monitored fragmentary radio reports with growing realization. The Germans were not probing. This was a full offensive, and his 35 tank destroyers, most of them M18s, were the only mobile anti-tank force between the German spearhead and Bastogne. The conventional response would be to concentrate forces, establish a defensive line, call for reinforcements. But Jensen understood his vehicle's capabilities. 35 Hellcats could not stop 200 German tanks in a stand-up fight, but they could do something else entirely. At 1000 hours, Jensen issued orders. All M18 platoons to operate independently, no fixed positions, find German armor, kill logistics vehicles, destroy command posts, hit flanks and rear areas, never stand and fight. Speed was defense, mobility was survival. It was a desperate gamble. Scattering his already outnumbered force violated every principle of conventional defense, but Jensen had seen what concentrated M18s could do in Italy, and he understood the clock was ticking. Every hour the Germans spent dealing with harassment, hunting phantoms, and guarding flanks was an hour the 101st Airborne had to dig in at Bastogne, and an hour closer to Allied reinforcements arriving. By noon, on December 16th, 15 M18 Hellcats were operating across a 30-kilometer front, each platoon or individual vehicle acting on its own initiative. They hit supply columns, destroyed fuel trucks, ambushed command vehicles, and when they encountered German armor, they killed from unexpected angles and vanished before effective return fire. The psychological effect on German tankers was profound and unexpected. They had fought the methodical Soviets, who relied on mass. They had fought the positional British, who relied on prepared defenses. The M18s fought like nothing in their experience, appearing from nowhere, killing and disappearing, before retaliation was possible. German after-action reports from December 16th contain repeated references to phantom American tanks, to ambushes from impossible angles, to vehicles that seemed to teleport across the battlefield. Oberleutnant Friedrich Kurz, commanding a Panther platoon in the 2nd Panzer Division, recorded in his log, "Encountered American tank destroyer at approximately 1200 hours, fired 3 rounds. No effect. Target had displaced before shells arrived. Vehicle reappeared 700 meters to our right, fired once, destroyed Hauptmann-Meyer's tank, then vanished again. Estimate enemy speed at 60+ kilometers per hour. Impossible to engage effectively." This was the strategic irony the Germans had not anticipated. They had prepared for a battle of mass against mass, iron against iron. They encountered instead a battle of time against tempo. The M18s could not defeat 200 tanks, but they could slow them, scatter them, force them to deploy cautiously when their entire operational plan demanded speed. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. By 1800 hours. On December 16th, the German offensive had advanced an average of 8 kilometers, far short of the 25 to 30 kilometers planned for the first day. Logistics columns were stalled, command posts were relocating away from the front to avoid harassment. Panzer divisions that should have been racing for the Meuse were instead deploying in all-around defensive postures, guarding against attacks from directions the operational plan had never considered. The cost to the Americans was not negligible. Of the 15 M18s operating independently that first day, 4 were destroyed. 1 hit a mine. The Hellcat's light armor made it vulnerable to even small anti-personnel mines that heavier tanks could survive. 2 were caught by German infantry with Panzerfausts in close terrain where speed provided no advantage. The 4th was destroyed by a Tiger that had taken a concealed position and waited. Patient, methodical German doctrine triumphing over American mobility in that particular engagement. But the exchange ratio was devastating for the Germans. Those 15 M18s operating for 12 hours destroyed or disabled 47 German tanks and armored vehicles, 23 logistics trucks, and 5 command vehicles. The ratio, 11.7 to 1 in favor of the Hellcats, was unprecedented in armored warfare. December 17th. The fighting intensified. German command, recognizing that scattered American tank destroyers were bleeding the offensive, issued specific orders: suppress enemy tank destroyer activity, dedicate reconnaissance elements to hunt them, commit Luftwaffe ground attack aircraft where weather permitted. At 0830, near the village of Longeville, First Lieutenant Charles Bogus's M18 platoon, 3 vehicles, encountered a company of Panthers, approximately 14 tanks, moving west on the main road to Bastogne. The range was 1,000 meters, too far for reliable kills on frontal armor. Bogus had 2 choices: withdraw without engaging, or try something audacious. He chose audacious. Bogus ordered his 3 Hellcats to advance directly toward the German column at maximum speed, not flanking, not seeking cover, a direct approach at 70 kilometers per hour on the frozen road. The German reaction was confusion. American tank destroyers did not charge. They ambushed. They flanked. This violated everything in German tactical experience. The Panther Company commander hesitated. Were these vehicles American, or was identification uncertain? By the time he ordered engagement, the M18s had closed to 600 meters and were firing on the move. Hitting a target while traveling at 70 kilometers per hour requires exceptional gun stabilization or exceptional luck. The M18 had mediocre stabilization at best. What it had was volume of fire and closing speed. Bogus's 3 Hellcats fired 17 rounds in the first 30 seconds, wildly inaccurate by peacetime gunnery standards. But at rapidly decreasing range and against stationary targets that had not yet oriented their turrets. 3 hits. 1 Panther's track destroyed, immobilizing it. 1 struck the turret face. No penetration, but the impact damaged the gun mantlet, rendering the weapon inoperable. The 3rd hit the side of a Panther that had been traversing its turret, penetrating the fighting compartment. Then the M18s were through the German line, traveling too fast for the Panthers to traverse and follow, passing between the tanks at ranges of 50 to 100 meters, close enough that the Panthers' long guns could not depress sufficiently to target them. Bogus's platoon emerged on the western side of the German column, having run the gauntlet at highway speed and disappeared into the tree line before effective return fire was possible. Behind them, the Panther Company was in disarray, 1 burning, 1 immobilized, 1 with a damaged gun, and the rest deployed in all directions, trying to identify where the threat had gone. The engagement lasted 90 seconds. The Germans spent the next 40 minutes reorganizing, treating wounded, and establishing security in all directions before resuming their advance. 40 minutes the offensive could not afford. Captain Ernst Bachmann, a decorated Panther ace with 82 kills on the Eastern Front, encountered M18s on December 18th near the village of Chanogne. His company, 9 Panthers, was advancing in echelon formation, proper spacing, proper security, exactly according to doctrine. At 1400 hours, an M18 appeared on his left flank at approximately 900 meters. Bachmann ordered his platoon to engage. His gunner was excellent, one of the best in the division. The first round was precisely aimed. Time of flight, 1.3 seconds. The M18 was not there when the shell arrived. The Hellcat had accelerated the instant it fired, moving perpendicular to Bachmann's position at 60+ kilometers per hour. The German shell passed through empty air where the American vehicle had been moments before. By the time Bachmann's gunner reloaded and reacquired, 8 seconds, the M18 had covered over 130 meters and was partially concealed by terrain. Second shot, miss. The Hellcat reappeared, fired, and vanished again. This time, the American round struck the side of Bachmann's wingman's Panther, penetrating the engine compartment. The tank did not burn, but it was immobilized. For 12 minutes, this pattern repeated. The M18, possibly 2, Bachmann was never certain, would appear at varying ranges and angles, fire 1 or 2 rounds, and vanish before return fire was effective. German shells hit the ground, hit trees, hit abandoned buildings. They did not hit the Hellcat. By 1412, Bachmann had lost 3 Panthers, 1 destroyed, II immobilized and expended 68 rounds of main gun ammunition without achieving a single hit on an American vehicle. He ordered his company to withdraw to a more defensible position and called for air support to suppress enemy tank destroyers. The air support never came. The weather was overcast, ceiling at 200 meters, and the Luftwaffe had precious few aircraft to spare for ground attack missions. In his after-action report, Bachmann wrote, "Enemy tank destroyer tactics are unlike anything encountered on the Eastern Front. Soviet tanks attack in mass and can be defeated through superior gunnery and positioning. American tank destroyers attack individually or in small groups using speed to render our superior firepower ineffective. Recommend dedicated anti-tank destroyer tactics and weapons." But there were no dedicated anti-tank destroyer tactics because the Germans had never encountered an enemy vehicle that fought this way. The specifications tell part of the story. The M18 Hellcat in detail. Weight 18.4 tons, combat loaded, making it the lightest armored fighting vehicle in its class fielded by any major power. By comparison, the Soviet Su-85 tank destroyer weighed 29.6 tons, the German Jagdpanzer IV 25.8 tons. Dimensions: length 5.28 meters, width 2.87 meters, height 2.57 meters. Notably low profile. The driver's hatch was only 1.2 meters above the ground, making the vehicle difficult to spot at range and allowing it to use terrain features that would not conceal taller vehicles. Armor: frontal glacis, 25 millimeters, at 47 degrees. Effective thickness, approximately 35 millimeters, against standard armor-piercing rounds. Side armor, 12.7 millimeters, vertical. Turret front, 25 millimeters, curved. Rear, 12.7 millimeters. This was barely sufficient to stop heavy machine gun fire. A German MG-42 firing armor-piercing rounds at 300 meters could penetrate the Hellcat's side armor. A Panzerfaust at any range would go through like tissue paper. Armament: 76mm gun M1A1 or M1A2, 52 calibers long, muzzle velocity, with M62 APCBC armor-piercing capped ballistic cap, approximately 792 meters per second, with HVAP high-velocity armor-piercing tungsten core, approximately 1,036 meters per second. Ammunition stowage: 45 rounds in the turret bustle and hull. Penetration capability: M62 APCBC could penetrate approximately 109 millimeters of armor at 500 meters at 30 degrees from perpendicular. At 1,000 meters, penetration dropped to 92 millimeters. The HVAP round, when available, could penetrate 157 millimeters at 500 meters, 145 millimeters at 1,000 meters. This meant that against German armor, the M18 had specific engagement parameters. Against Panzer IV, 50mm frontal armor, at perpendicular 30mm sides, could reliably penetrate from any angle at any combat range. Against Panther, 80mm frontal armor at 55 degrees, effective thickness 140mm, 50mm side armor, could not reliably penetrate the front except with HVAP at close range, could penetrate sides at most combat ranges with standard ammunition. Against Tiger FS, 100mm frontal armor, 80mm sides, could not penetrate the front with standard ammunition at any range, could penetrate sides at 500 meters or less with careful shot placement. HVAP improved odds but was not guaranteed. Against Tiger II, 150mm frontal armor at 50 degrees 80mm sides, could not penetrate the front with any ammunition at combat ranges. Side shots with HVAP at close range were possible but risky. These specifications created clear tactical requirements. The M18 had to avoid frontal engagements with heavy German tanks entirely. It had to close to medium or short range for side shots, and it had to survive long enough to achieve favorable positioning. The armor specifications made survival through protection impossible. But the mobility specifications made survival through evasion practical. Engine: Wright Continental R975C4, 9-cylinder radial, air-cooled, 460 horsepower at 2,400 RPM. The same engine used in the M4 Sherman, but in a vehicle weighing 12 tons less. Power-to-weight ratio, 25 horsepower per ton, compared to 15.7 for the Sherman, 13.3 for the Panther, and 12.8 for the Tiger the Fund. Transmission. Torque-matic automatic, 3 forward speeds, 1 reverse. Gear ratios optimized for acceleration and top speed rather than slow speed control. This made the M18 less precise in tight maneuvering, but devastatingly fast on roads and open terrain. Suspension. Torsion bar, 5 road wheels per side, independent. Ground pressure, 0.78 kilograms per square centimeter, compared to 1.04 for the Sherman. Lower ground pressure meant better performance on soft ground, mud, sand, snow, where heavier tanks bogged down. Top speed, 88 kilometers per hour on paved roads, 55 kilometers per hour on good dirt roads, 35 to 40 kilometers per hour cross-country in favorable terrain. Acceleration, 0 to 50 kilometers per hour in 11 seconds. For comparison, the Panther required 23 seconds to reach 50 kilometers per hour. The Tiger, I required over 30 seconds. Turning. The M18 could pivot on its own axis. Neutral steer in 8 seconds for a full 360-degree rotation. The Panther required 18 seconds. The Tiger, 24 seconds. These numbers translated to tactical flexibility that German tankers found impossible to counter. An M18 could appear at a range of 1,000 meters, fire, and if the shot missed or failed to penetrate, it could accelerate to maximum speed and be out of effective return fire range in under 20 seconds. It could approach a German position at 1 bearing, fire, and reappear at a completely different bearing in less than 2 minutes. It could cross 1,000 meters of open ground in 40 seconds, faster than a German gunner could traverse turret, acquire target, aim, and fire. The Germans had built their tanks to dominate through superior specifications. The M18 rendered specifications irrelevant through speed. Sergeant Michael Mike Pena, gunner in an M18 of the 814 Tank Destroyer Battalion, described the psychology of fighting in a Hellcat. You know going in that one hit kills you. There's no wounded tank with the M18. You take an 88mm round anywhere, you're done. That focuses the mind. You don't think about armor, you think about not being where the shell lands. Our driver, Corporal Jackson, he was the best I ever saw. He could feel when the Germans were about to fire, something in how their turret moved, and he'd be accelerating before they pulled the trigger. We got hit at once. December 20th, near Bastogne, 88mm round from a Tiger at about 800 meters. Went through the turret bustle, missed the crew by maybe 40 centimeters, exited the other side. We kept fighting, killed that Tiger 3 minutes later with a side shot. That's the Hellcat. You don't survive hits. You survive by not getting hit. The training program for M18 crews reflected this philosophy. Standard tank destroyer training was 14 weeks. M18 training was 16 weeks, with the extra time devoted almost entirely to evasive driving and shoot-and-scoot drills. Fort Hood, Texas, autumn 1943. The first M18 training course. Captain Theodore Walton, instructor. Gentlemen, everything you learned about armored warfare, forget it. You're not driving a tank. You're not built to take hits. Your armor is a suggestion. Your survival depends on 3 things. Shoot first, shoot accurately, and be gone before they shoot back. If you are still in the same position 30 seconds after you fire, you have failed and you are probably dead. The training emphasized specific scenarios. Engagement drill. Alpha. Hellcat approaches a dug-in Panther at 1,000 meters, fires on the move while approaching at maximum speed, does not stop to verify kill, assumes miss, and continues closing, fires second shot at 600 meters, if no penetration, closes to 300 meters and targets side armor or tracks. Total time from first shot to withdrawal, under 2 minutes. Engagement drill. Bravo. Hellcat encounters a Tiger at 800 meters in open terrain, does not engage frontally, immediately accelerates to maximum speed on a perpendicular course to avoid return fire. Uses terrain, buildings, trees, depressions, to break line of sight. Maneuvers to flank. Engages side armor at 400 to 600 meters. If flank shot is not available within 4 minutes, disengages entirely and repositions. Engagement drill. Charlie. Multiple Hellcats engage a superior force. One vehicle acts as bait, revealing itself at long range and drawing enemy attention, while enemy tanks orient on the bait vehicle. 2 or 3 additional Hellcats strike from flanks or rear. Bait vehicle immediately displaces at maximum speed. Entire platoon relocates to new positions before enemy can organize counterfire. These drills were practiced until they became instinctive. The average M18 crew, by the time they reached combat in Europe, had fired over 200 practice rounds and driven over 800 kilometers in training scenarios. They knew their vehicle's capabilities to the centimeter and second. December 19th, 1944. The fighting around Bastogne reached a critical phase. The 101st Airborne was encircled. German pressure was intensifying from all directions. American commanders faced a cruel calculus. Could the paratroopers hold until Patton's Third Army arrived from the south? The M18s of the 805 Tank Destroyer Battalion were operating inside the shrinking perimeter, the only armor available to the 101st. 15 Hellcats remained operational. 4 had been lost in the previous 3 days. They were desperately low on ammunition. The original 45-round load was now down to an average of 18 rounds per vehicle. HVAP ammunition, the tungsten core rounds capable of penetrating heavy German armor, was nearly exhausted. An average of 2 rounds per vehicle remained. Lieutenant Leiper's vehicle, C7, sat in a concealed position 300 meters north of the Bastogne perimeter. Through his periscope, he watched a German formation assembling in the tree line 1,200 meters distant. Panthers. He counted 11, possibly 12. Behind them, infantry in white winter camouflage and several Stugee 3 assault guns. This was not harassment. This was a deliberate assault on the American perimeter. And between those Panthers and the foxholes of the 101st were 3 M18 Hellcats with a combined total of 51 rounds of ammunition. The odds were mathematically insane. 12 Panthers, each weighing 45 tons, mounting 75mm guns that could kill a Hellcat at any range. With frontal armor, the M18 could not penetrate. Against 3 18-ton vehicles with paper-thin armor and limited ammunition. Leiper made the calculation in seconds. A direct defense was suicide. The Panthers would destroy the Hellcats and overrun the paratroopers. Withdrawal was tactically sound, but strategically unacceptable. The 101st had nowhere left to retreat. The only option was to make the Germans believe they faced a much larger force than actually existed. At 1000 hours, the Panther assault began. The German tanks advanced in line, approximately 50-meter spacing, speed about 15 kilometers per hour. Textbook tactics: maintain formation, suppress defensive positions with high explosive rounds close to within 300 meters before the final rush. At 900 meters, Leiper's first Hellcat fired from a concealed position on the German left flank. One shot, a Panther's track shattered. The tank slewed to a stop, blocking the vehicle behind it. Before the Germans could identify the firing position, the M18 was moving, already 200 meters from where it had fired. 30 seconds later, the second Hellcat fired from the opposite flank. Range, 850 meters. Another hit, this time on the rear deck of a Panther as it turned to face the first threat, engine fire. The tank halted. The German formation paused. 2 tanks hit from different directions within a minute. The Panthers deployed into a defensive posture, turrets rotating to cover all approaches. Infantry dropped prone. The assault stalled. 1 minute later, Leiper's own vehicle fired from a third position, directly ahead of the German formation. Range, 1,000 meters, too far for reliable penetration, but close enough to force a reaction. The round struck a Panther's frontal armor without penetrating. But the Germans now believed they were under attack from three sides. The Panther Company commander made a tactical decision, suppress the enemy positions, then resume the assault. For the next 8 minutes, German tanks fired over 120 rounds of high-explosive and armor-piercing ammunition at the positions where the American shots had originated. Every single round hit empty ground. The three M18s were nowhere near their original firing positions. At 10:12, the three Hellcats struck simultaneously from new locations. Leiper's vehicle targeted a Panther from the right rear quarter at 600 meters, penetration through the engine compartment. The second Hellcat hit a different Panther in the side at 700 meters, penetration, ammunition detonation. The third Hellcat's shot missed but forced another German tank to maneuver, breaking the formation's cohesion. The German assault dissolved. The company commander, believing he faced a battalion of American tank destroyers rather than three individual vehicles, ordered a withdrawal to regroup and call for air support. The Panthers pulled back, covered by smoke and suppressive fire from the Stu-G3s. Total engagement time: 14 minutes. German losses: 4 Panthers destroyed or immobilized, 2 damaged. American losses: 0. Ammunition expenditure: 17 rounds. The 101st Airborne held the perimeter. That evening, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, commanding the 101st at Bastogne, visited Leiper's position. McAuliffe was famous for his one-word response to a German surrender demand: "Nuts!" But his words to the tank destroyer crews were longer. "You boys just bought us another day, maybe 2. Keep buying us days, and Patton will get here in time." Leiper's crew had not eaten hot food in 3 days and had not slept more than 4 hours in the past 48. They were operating on cold rations, adrenaline, and the knowledge that if they failed, the men in those foxholes behind them would die. Decker, the driver, asked the general a simple question: "Sir, how much longer do we need to hold?" McAuliffe's answer was honest: "Until you can't hold any more. Then a little longer." December 20th through 22nd. The weather broke briefly, allowing Allied air support to strike German positions and resupply Bastogne by airdrop. Among the supplies, ammunition for the M18s. Not enough. Each vehicle received 20 additional rounds, bringing their total to approximately 38 per vehicle, still below the standard combat load. But it was enough to continue fighting. The psychological impact of the M18s extended beyond simple kill counts. German commanders, uncertain how many American tank destroyers they actually faced, began committing disproportionate forces to flank security. Panthers that should have been spearheading the assault were instead deployed defensively, watching for the Hellcats that might appear from any direction. Oberstleutnant Franz Bauer, commanding officer of a panzer regiment in the Panzer Lehr Division, wrote in his log on December 21st, "The American tank destroyers are everywhere and nowhere. We spot one vehicle, deploy to engage, and another fires from a different direction. We engage that position, and a third vehicle appears. We have no effective counter-tactic. Our armor and firepower advantages are negated by their speed and coordination. Estimate facing 20 to 30 enemy tank destroyers in our sector. The actual number of M18s in his sector, 7. This force multiplication through deception and mobility was the M18's greatest contribution to the Battle of the Bulge. The 15 Hellcats of the 805 Battalion could not stop the German offensive, but they created the illusion of a much larger defensive force, slowed the German advance at critical moments, and gave American reinforcements time to arrive and establish stronger positions. The Germans had planned for a battle of attrition, trading losses, but maintaining momentum through superior numbers and firepower. The M18s denied them momentum. Every engagement, every ambush, every appearance and disappearance of American tank destroyers consumed time, and time was the one resource the German offensive could not afford to lose. By December 23rd, the weather had cleared sufficiently for sustained air operations. Allied fighter bombers began hitting German positions in mass. Patton's Third Army, pushing north from Luxembourg, was within 20 kilometers of Bastogne. The window for German success was closing. On December 26th, lead elements of Patton's 4th Armored Division broke through to Bastogne. The siege was lifted. The German offensive, already stalled, began to collapse. Of the original 35 tank destroyers, M18s and M10s, that had faced the German assault on December 16th, 21 remained operational on December 26th. The M18s specifically, of 15 vehicles engaged, 9 survived, 6 were destroyed. 2 by mines, 3 by direct fire from German tanks, 1 by a Panzerfaust in close combat. But those 15 Hellcats, operating over 10 days, destroyed or disabled 83 German tanks and armoured vehicles, an exchange ratio of 13.8 to 1. No other American armoured vehicle in the European theatre achieved a comparable ratio under similar circumstances. The cost in human terms was severe. M18 crews, because of the open turret design, suffered higher casualty rates than crews in enclosed vehicles. Of the 6 Hellcats lost, only 11 crew members survived out of a total of 30. The thin armour meant that hits were almost always fatal to the vehicle and frequently fatal to the crew. Sergeant Thomas Reynolds, loader in an M18 destroyed on December 24th, was one of 3 survivors from his vehicle. He described the loss. "We were repositioning after hitting a column of trucks, moving fast, maybe 60 kilometers per hour, came around a corner and there was a Tiger maybe 200 meters away. Our driver tried to swerve, but there wasn't time. The 88 hit us in the side. The round went through the fighting compartment. Our gunner and commander died instantly. I was blown out of the turret by the explosion. The driver and assistant driver got out, but the driver died from his injuries an hour later. I don't remember much, except the noise and the heat. When people ask if the M18 was a good tank, I tell them it wasn't a tank. It was a weapon, and like any weapon, it could kill you if you used it wrong." This was the unspoken reality of the Hellcat. It demanded perfection from its crews. A Sherman could survive mistakes, poor positioning, slow reactions, predictable tactics, because it had armor as a buffer. The M18 had no buffer. Mistakes were lethal. This created a selection effect. M18 crews who survived their first few engagements became exceptional. Those who did not adapt quickly did not survive. By late December 1944, the average surviving M18 crew had 5.3 tanks to their credit and 6.8 weeks of combat experience. For comparison, Sherman crews averaged 2.1 kills and 9.4 weeks. The difference reflected both the M18's effectiveness and the brutal learning curve it imposed. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.